the American Ambassador's residence in Phoenix Park in Dublin. I'm John Schaefer from WNYC Radio in New York. And with me is the composer David Lang, Pulitzer Prize winner and co-founder of the new music organization called Bang on a Can. And David, your creative journey from kind of renegade to Pulitzer Prize winner has been
shocking.
An unexpected one.
It's been very unexpected, yes.
What does it say about the change in what we expect back home in America from our creative artists, that you can make that journey and still be essentially the same guy that you were when you started?
I think the strange thing about the Bang on a Can story and also my personal story is that, we never really wanted to be outsiders. We just wanted to ask some questions about other places that music can go. So you grow up as a classical musician, you're interested in things which are off the beaten path, and somehow it's a challenge to the world. And so it really felt when I won the Pulitzer like a faucet had been turned on, and I had, all of a sudden, been accepted into the world. I never really thought I was out of the world, and I never really wanted to be a lion of culture either. I wasn't a barbarian, I wasn't a lion of culture, but it was sort of like the shift happened immediately.
Yeah. And without any warning, or did you, there were signposts along the way, maybe?
Well, I've been working, and people seem to like me, so, it wasn't a surprise that somebody would like my music, but it was a surprise that all of a sudden it would become acceptable.
Yeah. What was the thinking behind Bang on a Can? For folks who aren't familiar with Bang on a Can, maybe a brief primer on what it is.
Well, when we started in the mid-'80s, Michael and Julie and I all came out of graduate school.
That's Michael Gordon, Julia Wolf.
Julia Wolf, and I. We all went to Yale. We all came out. We were all living in New York, and we were best friends and meeting every day and talking about our lives. And we sort of noticed things that we wished were different about the music world. And one of the really interesting things which happens is we all know that there are these categories for music. There's jazz, classical music, opera, world music, rock and roll, rockabilly, punk, country western. Everybody has a little box, right? And so that makes it really easy to find music. It makes it really convenient if you're promoting it or if you already know what you need. But actually what we discovered for most of our friends and most of the creative people that we knew is that we weren't waking up in the morning thinking about how to fit neatly into a box. We woke up thinking, I have a little bit of this and I'm interested in that, and how do they mix? So those categories make it easy to find what you already know, but it also means that if you are trying to build bridges between worlds, there's no good place for you to go.
Well, it's interesting because in my field, in broadcasting, those boxes are the bedrock on which radio stations are built. You pick your box and that's what you do. And for me, the challenge was I don't feel like any of those boxes, or I feel like all of those boxes.
Yeah, well, so I think that's the better way to look at it. I think, and that's really why I think your relationship to us has been so powerful, because I think you were doing in broadcasting, we needed, in order for us to be successful, we needed to have you, because we needed to have the world understand that this was okay, right? But it is really true if you're driving in your car and the description of the radio comes on and it goes top 40, oldies, whatever. Everything has a really specific slot. And if you violate that slot, it's very easy to turn the channel.
And you can see almost to a comical extent how this can be a challenge to people with your iTunes. You open up your iTunes and you look at categories, and you're listening to Ethiopian music of the 1970s and the category says reggae. Or something like that.
Yeah, it's like, and you can understand why someone would categorize it that way, because probably the reggae category is larger than the Ethiopian category. So.
You've traveled a lot. Does this seem, this need to box the creative arts up, does this seem like an American thing, or have you found it everywhere?
Oh, I think it's everywhere. I think people like things to be dependable. you know? And I think it's an inherent conflict between the people who make things and the people who receive things, you know? It's like we are insiders in this world, and so we don't mind doing all the research. In fact, that's part of the fun for us, is finding what's unusual or strange or what breaks down interesting boundaries. People who have jobs, they want to know, I have a free night to go to a show. I know I have to enjoy it because I don't have nights to waste, you know, on things that I'm not going to like.
Right.
But for us, I think this really is the important thing. I believe that the world should make it easy and comfortable for people to be as curious about things as they can be.
Right.
And so that's why the boundary thing really always bothers me.
Yeah. So, you know, this festival that you're doing here in Dublin, bringing together Bang on a Can and other American artists, but also bringing in Irish artists, is that an attempt to bring to Dublin this aesthetic of take a chance? You might actually like it.
It's a little bit like that. There's a huge range of music here and on this festival, but it actually came out of something that was much more, you know, kind of parochial than that, which is the neighborhood I live in. You know, I was trying to think of what to do. Whenever, especially there's this thing that happens when you program a festival for someone, and I've been doing a lot more programming, is you notice that you're leaving a lot of things out. And I always feel bad about that, because I feel like, especially I'm a New Yorker, I'm coming to Ireland, I'm going to program Irish music. There are lots of great Irish composers I'm not going to be able to program. So I needed an idea to run through the festival so that I could say what could get in and what would be excluded. And the idea, I thought, was that there's a certain kind of music which is associated with my neighborhood, with Lower Manhattan, that has traditionally come from within a few blocks of where I live. And I wondered if it was possible to find the spiritual descendants of that music in Ireland, in New York, in other English-speaking places, and bring it all together in a festival. So in a way, it seems like this very broad-minded world, but actually, it's just it's people who like my little block in New York. So.
Yeah, but you know, as the study of fractals has taught us, very often the small is writ large when you take the broader view.
Right.
And so you have found connections, both musical and kind of aesthetic,
right
here. And that's been, I mean, my first trip to Dublin, I met Donnacha Dennehy, the Irish composer, for whom I commissioned a piece for you guys, for the Bang on a Can All-Stars.
And we met Donnacha through you.
And the thing about Donnacha was that he was working at Trinity College, and he wasn't teaching composition. He was teaching music technology, which in a funny sort of way freed him from those boxes that you were talking about. It was just, here's the technology, here are some things you can do with it. Now go do them. And that seems to be, maybe there's a generation for whom those boxes are not as firmly fixed as they were for people who grew up with pen notating on paper.
I think that's true, but I also think it's because of people like the Kronos Quartet and because of us, and you know, that we've been able to sort of create a universe of less boxed in music. I'd also like to say, you know, since we're here talking about the international things that happen from my neighborhood. So my neighborhood of Lower Manhattan, which is really where kind of America's minimalism for export culture happened. You know, it's the neighborhood where Steve Reich lived, Philip Glass still lives, Meredith Monk, Lamont Young, Michael Gordon, Julie Wolfe and I live, Phil Niblock, Glenn Branca, Phil Klein. I mean, it's a neighborhood. Lou Reed, Laurie Anderson, David Byrne. It's a neighborhood where musicians have always clustered, and even in previous generations, Edgar Varese and Charles Ives, Elliott Carter, John Cage. It's a neighborhood where people came because it seemed like this neighborhood was full of art, and so its musical persona was open to be made by you. So the connection to Ireland is really interesting that you mentioned Donnacha, because Donnacha studied in Holland with Louis Andriessen, And Andriessen, a great teacher and a great composer, became a beacon for composers from around the world who were looking for a way of taking what we invented in Lower Manhattan and figuring out how to apply it to world culture. So Louis heard music from our neighborhood, attracted all of these students from around the world, and then sent them out to their universes, and sent some of them here. He sent others back to America, or others to England, or others all around the world.
And let's not forget that little neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. Very few of those people came from there. It was someplace that brought, you know, you're talking about American artists who came from all across the U.S., settled here, and then, so the exporting was simply kind of a function of this importing and then this implosion of creative energy in one little space.
Well, the embarrassing truth is that I live in that neighborhood because those composers are from there. Because when I was in high school, I got a Steve Reich record in 1974.
And you lived about as far from Lower Manhattan as you could.
I lived in Los Angeles. And so I was a nerdy, you know, classical music kid, you know, working in a record store as my high school job. And I found this record of Steve Reich, and I started listening to all the weird music I could find. And someone who knew a little bit more about this music than I did said, oh, you know what links all the composers you like is they all live within a few blocks of each other in Lower Manhattan. And I remember as a 16-year-old thinking, I'm gonna live in that neighborhood. That's my future, you know. And I've lived in that neighborhood now for 34 years.
Yeah, and having grown up in New York myself, I had the benefit of being a 16-year-old on that scene.
Oh my God, that must have been so exciting.
Well, it was the first flowering of CBGBs, which was my focus of attention.
Right.
And the thing is that that punk movement is not so far removed from the contemporary classical artists that you're talking about. There was a spirit of needing to do it yourself, of having to build your community kind of from the ground up, because there wasn't the sort of institutional support that you would get at Lincoln Center or places like that. And that too is something that on my trips here to Dublin, I've seen very much in action with especially some of the composers that you've programmed in this festival.
Right.
So there has also been another connection. There's been a bit of an Irish influx into your annual summer series in the west of Massachusetts that is near Tanglewood and that almost inevitably has come to be known as Banglewood.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, you know, Bang on a Can exists to do as many of the things that we can think of to create a comprehensive, thriving, experimental music community. So we have this festival, which is a 12-hour marathon in New York, and we've done this marathon all over the world, including a marathon that we're going to do today. Today in Dublin, it's only 8 hours. You know, we can do that for breakfast.
It's a chamber music festival.
Yeah, it's chamber music, right? Yeah. So you know, we did a 27-hour marathon once, which you know well. One of the things we've done, which has been really kind of inspiring for me personally, is we started a school for young composers and performers. People who have dedicated their lives to playing and writing experimental music come and they become the mentors for people from around the world who are younger at beginning stages in their careers, and we work together to make all sorts of really incredible music, and we meet every summer at an art museum, Mass MoCA, in Western Massachusetts, which is fantastic, and we've done this for 14 years now.
Right.
The incredible thing about it is when you say that you are looking for the oddball, interesting, strange, genre-defying musicians from around the world, there's certain countries which, for some reason, jump out and always send people. We always have people from Holland. We always have people from Australia. We always have people from Ireland. So we've had a huge Irish presence at this festival. And so every year we have young Irish composers and performers who come, and I think I want to go back to something you said about the birth of punk, because I think it's actually really interesting. I think probably in any culture, not just musical culture, but I think probably in any walk of life, there's a mainstream.
Yeah.
And the people who want to do something other than what's in the mainstream, they have to fight a little harder. And it makes them a little more passionate, and it makes them a little more self-reliant. And there's probably a way in any field. I mean, I don't know anything about the sciences or philosophy or if in applied mathematics this is the way it is. But I suspect that it's a little bit the same attitude, which is there's the way you're supposed to do things. And if you have another idea, you're going to have to fight a little harder to make that happen. And I think there's something actually common to the personas of people in all of those disciplines, whatever field they're coming from, if you want to break that mold.
Right. Well, I can tell you it's that way in broadcasting, and as you well know, it's that way in the visual arts as well.
Right, it definitely is.
So, to get back to the this kind of Irish American, this Irish bang on a can connection, who are some of the composers who've gone through Banglewood there in Massmoka?
Well, you know, a lot of the people have come who have been students, the former students of Donnacha Dennehy. So Irene Buckley, Linda Buckley, who are both on the festival here, have come through. Every year we have young composers and performers.
And this year here in Dublin, in fact just yesterday, you did a master class.
That's right.
Which might be a bit of a misnomer here. Explain a little bit about what that was.
Well, usually what happens, you know, I teach at Yale, and I'm used to spending a lot of time with young composers, and I actually believe that that's one of my missions in life, is I feel like older musicians need to talk to younger musicians, you know, and I also believe that it can't really be master-student. It has to be professional who has work to future professional who doesn't have as much work yet but will, right? You know, I feel like it's really important to think that you're in a continuum of people with experiences and ranges of things. There are people who are more successful than me, people who are less successful than me. We are all actually trying to do the same thing.
Right.
I believe very much that it's part of my job to talk to young composers. So I did a master class here. Usually a master class is where you're talking to people at the beginnings of their career, but actually what it ended up being was talking to composers in their 40s who have careers here, who are actually working, who are doing things in public. So my job was not to give them advice or to look at their music and ask them a question about how they can push this aspect of their work or explore this other aspect. It was really just to have a conversation about where music fits in their life, and also it was a great audience for them because the masterclass was packed. So these things are public, and so we had 100 people there who are most of them composers and interested in trying to figure out what they're doing in their lives, and it was a great opportunity to talk about how music fits into their culture.
So let me wrap this up, David, by coming back to something you just said. You do teach at Yale now. It's hard to think of a more mainstream kind of musical position than professor of composition at Yale University.
Oh, yes.
So how do you walk that tightrope of still being, you know, someone outside, you know, someone fighting against those little eddies off the mainstream,
right,
while being in academia in such a prominent position?
It's really interesting because, you know, I have this kind of rebellious background, and I do have a doctorate in classical music, you know, and I do teach at Yale. And as my wife always reminds me, my nerd credentials are very high. But I think in a way it's more important to have this conversation in a place like Yale, because you have these incredibly talented composers who come through, who can do anything, who are really, I mean, Yale is a very excellent school, and these composers are sometimes they're even professional by the time they get to Yale. They're a student at Yale. We had a student who won an Emmy Award while he was a student who, you know, Timo Andres had a record come out on Nonesuch while he was our student. These people are at a very high level. So it's important at the last moment before they leave and become professionals to remind them not to take this world for granted, to remind them that their job is not to find a comfortable place to sit, but their job is to ask harder questions about where their field can go. And this, for me, is the most interesting thing about having won the Pulitzer, because it would have been very easy for me to say, you know, I can stop now. I can just decide I'm going to write, you know, normal music from now on and cash some checks, you know. But actually, I think if people are willing to let you do something more controversial, or let them, if they're going to encourage you to do what you want to do, then it becomes your obligation to push your field a little farther, you know. So I've been trying to push as hard as I can, and I try to get that message to my students as well.
Well, David, congratulations on everything you've accomplished, and nice speaking with you.
Thank you so much, John. This was really fun. Thank you.